Good to have you with us on this Friday. Hi, everybody. Thanks for making us a part of your day. In state after state, legislators are considering measures restricting which bathroom people can use. For some, the new world of trans activism requires a legal response, one that requires people to use the bathroom that matches the gender they had at birth. These bills have triggered an impassioned debate. Joining us now is trans activist Hayden Mora. Hayden Mora, founder and principal of the Parallax Group, a trans site consulting firm. He's a former member of the senior executive team at the Human Rights Campaign. It's good to have you with us. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
A lot for us to discuss. Let's talk about the legislation that we're seeing pop up all around the country.
Absolutely.
State legislators dealing with this. When the bills land on a governor's desk, it's something for he or she to decide.
That's
Even
right.
Donald Trump weighing in now.
That's
Talk about why these bills are coming along at this time.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, last legislative cycle was the first time we started to see anti-trans bills in earnest. This year we have nearly 50 specifically anti-trans bills in state legislatures across the country. And what this is an opportunity for folks, particularly on the far right extremists, folks that have lost the battle on same-sex marriage, folks that have lost the fight in other areas. And this is an opportunity for them to exploit a vulnerable, a marginalized population, trans folks, and to use it as an opportunity to gin up their base, to raise money, and to move forward their broader agendas. It's a pretty cynical strategy. It's something that we've seen before with other groups, but unfortunately, right now it's working in many ways because Americans are just getting to know trans people.
What do you say to people who might have concerns about who they'll encounter in a bathroom, or who their son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter will encounter in a bathroom? Because if the fears being expressed by some, Ted Cruz and many others, are have merit to them, the whole thing of who you'll find next to you in a public bathroom will be different than it's been, or so they say.
Yeah, well, I think the one of the most important things is that the so-called bathroom bills are really a distraction. They're an attempt to take people's attention away from the real issues that matter to voters, issues like the economy, issues like jobs, issues that make a difference in people's everyday lives. In terms of the bathroom issue itself, you know, trans folks are just like everybody else and just want to be able to use the restroom. There have been, you know, no incidents of any violence or problems, and in fact, the only people that are really in jeopardy in bathrooms are trans folks that are sometimes attacked if they're forced to use a gendered restroom that is different than the way that they present.
What do you make of some of the reaction that we're getting from corporate America that is being critical in many instances of states that have adopted these measures, of popular musicians who've canceled shows to protest what they see as an unfair action against one community?
Yeah.
Are you heartened by this? Does it surprise you, the reaction that we're seeing?
It's been absolutely incredible, and it's been you know, the trans community is in so many ways has been so isolated and so marginalized, and to have the experience of such a broad swath of folks standing up with us, as you mentioned, you know, Bruce Springsteen, corporations, you know, for companies and corporations, I think it's a really straightforward matter. I think it's a matter of creating a positive pro-business environment where they can grow the economy, they can create jobs, and they know that that means not discriminating. They want to be able to attract the best and the brightest and to do right by their employees. And I think other folks, you know, I think it's really clear. I think they see past the really cynical agenda of the folks pushing these agendas, and they see that this is a matter of basic fairness, and this is a moment where folks' lives are really on the line. And, you know, the quick thing I'd say is, you know, a lot of attention being brought to the bathroom bills and those issues. It's crucial. You know, the trans community faces so many challenges and struggles. 41% of trans folks attempt suicide. 41%. It's a remarkable number. The rates of HIV and AIDS, the rates of poverty in the trans community. And this is a community that is under profound duress. And these attacks are making it worse and making it much more dangerous, particularly for the most vulnerable folks, like young people, undocumented folks, and others.
In terms of the discussion that's taking place right now, seemingly everywhere, is in some ways, is this the moment that the trans community has wanted and been hoping for, where at least there's some acknowledgement, some recognition, a sense of being seen finally, and for a dialogue, even if it's difficult and progress may be uneven, the proverbial 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Is this kind of the moment when we're at least having the discussion and seeing people we might have looked past before?
I think it's an incredible moment, and there's an incredible possibility. Trans folks have really been in the shadows for so long, and not in front and center, and everything is changing very quickly. It's a strange moment, though, because at the same time we have popular culture dominated by, Laverne Cox and Janet Mock and Transparent, and, even, coverage in the stories. The coverage 3 or 4 years ago was almost exclusively parodies or mocking. The coverage today is much more substantive, much more nuanced, and a much greater familiarity. Caitlyn Jenner. And at the same time, you have horrific violence that continues unabated. As you know, just this last weekend, a young trans woman, 22 years old, was brutally beaten to death just outside of D.C. A week before that, a trans woman in Texas. That brings 21 trans women murdered this year, mostly trans women of color, and that's just the folks that we know about. And so we've got to figure out how we connect this moment where Americans are beginning to get to know trans folks in a certain way through popular culture with the lived reality of most of our community, which is not on the red carpet.
Talk about tonight's rally, Vigil event in Rockville.
Yeah, it's an incredible event. I hope folks will join. It's at 6 p.m. in Rockville. It's being organized by Casa Ruby, Baltimore Transgender Alliance, and the Trans Women of Color Collective, and it's in response directly to this recent and horrific murder of this young woman, 22 years old, and it's to have the community come together to speak out and to say that this isn't going to be tolerated. And the truth is that this sort of violence, it is horrific, it is brutal, it has been happening for a long time. Today, because of folks like you and others, it's actually covered, and it's a story that Americans know about, and we really face a choice as a country as to whether we're going to allow this brutality to continue, or if Republicans, Democrats, Independents, a trans person, you're not sure what trans is, but you're not for people being murdered or hurt for being themselves. This is a moment for Americans to step up and to say that this is intolerable, and I hope folks will join us at 6 p.m. this evening.
What sort of advice can you offer to parents who might be dealing with a son or daughter who comes forward and says, I've finally figured out something really central to who I am, but it's a lot more likely than not to be an issue where parents have concerns and questions and fear about what their child will encounter going into the world and what's next. What does this mean? So you're telling me this. What does this mean now going forward? A sense of potentially being overwhelmed.
Well, that makes total sense. I'd tell them 3 things, and I'd buy them a cup of coffee and hope to have a longer conversation. The first is that all of the sort of negative numbers that I ran through with you, 41% of folks attempting suicide, tremendous poverty, depression, anxiety. The single biggest factor that disrupts those negative outcomes, family acceptance, bar none. It is a thing that makes a dramatic difference, number one. Number 2, I'd say it is okay to not know the answers. It is okay to be a little bit freaked out. It's a journey, and it's a journey for all of us. And the third thing I'd say, there are incredible organizations. PFLAG is one example, but there are many others where they can connect with other parents who have had the experience and can help their kids. Bottom line, love your kids, believe them, create space, and follow their lead.
A lot of times, folks who know someone who's having this experience wants to be supportive. Is curious, wants to ask questions, but wants to be respectful and doesn't want to go farther than the person's ready to go, either in general or at any given moment, about parts, about attraction, about surgery, about 100 things. What advice can you give us on that score, to the extent that any bit of advice you give can be fairly applied?
Generalized.
Fair
enough. Well, one is, I think, just common sense. I think it's really remarkable the things that sort of folks just ask. People ask me on a regular basis about my genitals. My way of responding is to ask them about theirs in a very nonchalant way, and it sort of brings up the absurdity of that sort of conversation. Number 2 is, I'd say, ask your friend what they need. Ask your friend what they need from you. And 3 is to get educated, to learn. The National Center for Trans Equality, NCTE, the Transgender Law Center, all of these are tremendous resources to learn about trans identity and trans experience. But the main thing is to show up and to love them and to listen and to know that everyone's going to mess up. I mess up all the time. and that's okay. It's a journey for all of us.
Donald Trump was asked on national television about Caitlyn Jenner going into Trump Tower, needing to use the facilities there. And Donald Trump, who has offended many people and who has tried to position himself as an ultra-conservative candidate, running against 16 others and needing to kind of distinguish himself, which he's done. He's been the front runner all along. He says, I would tell Caitlyn Jenner to use the bathroom that she feels most comfortable with. And in terms of this issue broadly, I think it's a solution in search of a problem. This whole thing about bathrooms hasn't really been that much of an issue if you really are honest about it.
Yeah.
What did you make of that, given that it was coming from him?
One, I'm glad we're sitting. I rarely say this, but I think Donald Trump is right. Don't take that out of context. The other thing I'd say, and this is important, is that the truth is this is not a partisan issue as much as some folks would like to make it. It was a Republican governor in South Dakota that vetoed the bill that would have become law, which I thought was an amazing act of political courage. The trans folks, just like everyone else, are Democrats, independents, other parties, Republicans, and when someone knows a trans person, their party ID doesn't really matter. This is a common sense issue about fairness and decency, what kind of people we are. And I think Donald Trump sort of makes the case and makes the point, this isn't a partisan issue. This is about common decency and respect and who we are as Americans.
Trans activist Hayden Mora, thanks very much for coming in today. Appreciate your time. The event tonight in Rockville, 6 p.m.
Thank you so much for your coverage.
Good to have you here. Thanks for your time. We'll step aside. We're back, though, with more News Talk right after this.